Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Hunter. My pronouns are he, they, and I am so stoked, excited, and honored and grateful to be part of this conversation today. Welcome to the Power to Fly Chat and Learn today. Before I introduce our speaker, who I am so thrilled is here today and giving us their time, it's such a gift. Know that you can participate. You can turn your cameras on, join the fun, and you can ask questions in the chat. If you want to ask questions in the public chat, you can do so at any time. Ask them often, ask them early so we can get to them. Please be mindful that this is a shared space. So when you're using your language, be mindful that it's inclusive, welcoming, thoughtful, so that we can all have a very productive and inclusive hour. And if you want to ask anything anonymously, you can select my name or Marti's name if you like. But I'm happy to be the relay. You select my name, that will put a little red mark up, and then you can DM me and I'll ask something anonymously on your behalf. You can also use the Q&A function that Zoom has added, which also makes a convenient way to ask questions anonymously if you want. So you can do that. You have so many options. Okay. Follow us on all the things at PowerToFly, hashtag PowerToFly. You know the drill. Okay, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Marti G. Cummings, is an activist, community board member, gig worker, drag artist who ran for city council in Uptown Manhattan in 2021. For over a decade, Marti has deeply been involved in the community, advocating for LGBTQIA plus young people through the Ali Forney Center and aiding New Yorkers experiencing homelessness. During the 2016 election cycle, Marti started organizing their political activism and energized the community and brought people together to seek progressive change in the nation's politics. Marti currently sits on Community Board 9, serving the people of Upper Manhattan, and is a New York City Nightlife Advisory Board advisor. As a proud New Yorker, I am proud that Marti is working with New York City, and I am so happy to have you here. Marti, welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Hunter. Thank you so much for having me. I have to start that bio. But thank you for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Absolutely. So, Marti, before we jump into the conversation and the questions at hand, the topic at hand, that even though you said you have to shorten that bio, I think it's still brief. Like you are doing so many things. You have a podcast, you're on shows talking about things, you're doing calls to action on a regular basis. So is there anything that you'd like to share with us before we jump into the questions?
I guess the only thing, it's going to be a lot about what we're talking about today. There's a lot of anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation being introduced across the country, and there's a lot of work that we have to do even here in New York. So I'm just really excited to be able to be a drag artist who can hold space in like a political way around what's happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. So today's topic, friends, is the drag bans and the rising threat to the LGBTQIA plus community. As Marti just said, there's, it's affecting New York City. Marti, as you are well aware, we had protests just a couple weeks ago down at the LGBT Center around this very topic, right? So this is happening everywhere in some of the most progressive places and some of the places that are creating laws that are hurting our people. So we're going to get into that. So friends, the way this hour works is there will be questions that I'm going to ask that you wrote in advance. So thank you so much for asking these questions. And if you have any questions that come up over the chat, please, during this talk, please write them in the chat and we will address them. Okay, Marti, let's get into it. So we had a question. One of the first questions to kick us off is they wrote, "We have always enjoyed the entertainment of drag. So why are all these bills happening now? What's the push behind these anti-rights bills?"
So drag has been, first of all, like a little brief history of drag for those of you who aren't familiar. Drag has always been at the forefront of political resistance. The first known drag artist in the United States, William Dorsey Swann, was somebody who was born into slavery. And then after being enslaved, started to hold underground kind of speakeasies where people could dress up. So this is a time where it's illegal to be Black. It's illegal to wear clothing that doesn't align with your assigned gender at birth. It's illegal to be queer in any way, shape, or form in the 1800s. This was the first drag artist in our country. You have Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, who famously are trans activists who are also heavily involved in the drag world at Stonewall. And then Jose Sarria, who was the first openly queer person to run for public office in this country in 1961 for the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco. So drag has always been at the forefront. And queer people have been targeted by right-wing politics for decades. And the talking points that are being used now, calling drag artists and trans people groomers and pedophiles, are old tropes that Anita Bryant and those folks used to use about cis gay people. And now they're just recycling and regurgitating that language against drag artists. But these bills are happening now because I believe they're happening now as a way to see how far they can push their agenda. And the underlying message of all of these bills is not just targeting drag, but they can be interpreted in a way that directly impacts our trans community. Take the Tennessee bill, which is the one that's getting the most kind of traction in the media. The Tennessee bill, so you could say you're walking on the street and you're within 1,000 feet of a school or a playground or any of the places that they deem a public space that drag isn't allowed. You're walking on the street, you see a trans person, and you can say, oh, that's somebody in drag. So they're breaking the law, even though that's a trans person wearing clothing that's affirming to their gender. It can be used against them. And I think it's a way to distract from the real issues that are facing these legislators' constituents, which is gun violence and gun epidemics, school shootings, cost of living going up and wages not going up, food insecurity, police brutality. There's so many issues that aren't being addressed. So they're scapegoating and fear mongering to distract.
Yes, absolutely. On that note, today you shared on your Instagram a little infographic touching on some of this about, number of child deaths versus number of bills, right? Drag shows, 0 deaths, 14 anti-drag bills. Don't say gay, 0 child deaths, 22 states proposing legislation. Book bans, similar situation. Guns, 2,957 children killed annually. 34 states are weakening gun regulations.
Well, yeah, in Florida right now, anybody can get a gun, and you don't have to have a concealed to carry permit. It's really dangerous that we're prioritizing guns over human life. And for the party that claims to be pro-life, they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth. They want to force people into giving birth, even if it's not something that they are looking to do, whether because of economics or personal reasons or health reasons or whatever. But then once that kid is born, our foster care system is one of the worst in the world. We have legislators in some states who are saying that they don't want to fund school lunches because it's not the school's responsibility to feed kids, but there's kids who are going hungry. So how are you pro-life if you're prioritizing guns over actually taking care of these kids? And book bans haven't killed anybody. Drag shows haven't killed anybody. Trans people are not out here with an agenda to kill people. They are out here with an agenda to live full, healthy, happy, joyous lives. And the book bans that you mentioned are a whole nother conversation that dives deep into fascism. But we saw, a judge has temporarily blocked the Tennessee drag ban because they've stated that it infringes on First Amendment rights. A judge in Texas has ordered 12 books that have been banned from libraries, books that are speaking on Black history and LGBTQIA plus issues to be put back in libraries because it's infringing on First Amendment rights. So thank God there are some judges that are out there doing this work, but this is going to be decades long reversal that we're going to have to work on with these issues.
Yeah, it's really, there's like, when I see news of those judges, like, oh, there's hope, but it's like, oh, right, there's hope to revert. It's like, we're in the thick of it right now. Like the battle is happening, right?
We're in the thick of it. And listen, like the Biden administration is not perfect by any means, but they have, gotten a lot of their judicial nominations through. But we also have to look at the judicial nominations from the Bush and the Trump years, where those judges are going to do the opposite of what these judges are doing. So, and we have a Supreme Court that's not on our side. So it's going to take a lot of the progress we've made. We're seeing it rolled back for many marginalized communities, and we're going to have, there's going to be years of work to reverse this damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, friends, that you're writing in the chat, you're sharing about some of your experiences. Lisa posted that North Carolina just passed legislation that no longer requires permits to purchase handguns as well. Thanks for that update there. If you tell us where you're calling in from, friends, on the call, or anything that's related to the topic that you think is relevant, you can share that in the chat. We're here to hear it. New York City, you can carry guns. It's a wild world right now. I've always been trying to be polite to strangers on the street, but now I'm extra polite, Marti. I am not cutting people off anymore.
It's a very scary, I mean, we're living in a really, I don't know. You keep hearing those things like, oh, we're living through unprecedented times and historic events. I'm kind of tired of living through unprecedented times and historic events. It's exhausting, and the fact that school shootings and mass shootings in this country are happening almost every day and aren't even making the top of the news cycle anymore. That tells you what type of problem we have. It's not even breaking news because we're just sadly we're just
desensitized.
We're desensitized to it, and that's so morally bankrupt that's where we're at. But instead of focusing on those issues, we're targeting trans kids and gender affirming healthcare. And so these laws that are being put into place against trans kids, against trans people, they're saying it's to protect kids, but now it's creeping up. A lot of this legislation is starting to say, oh, well, gender affirming healthcare up until 21 or gender affirming healthcare up until 25. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress who want to completely eliminate it. You have the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and other states that are trying to replicate it that was supposed to be up until 8th grade, now creeping into high school. They're banning critical race theory in schools. These issues, they're not focused on the actual issues, and the repercussions are not just like legislative repercussions. The suicide attempt rate and suicide rate for LGBTQIA plus youth, particularly trans youth, is statistically way higher than that of their straight peers. And so when kids see that their legislators are enacting laws against their very humanity and well-being, that's going to cause a crisis where kids will lose their lives because of this.
Yeah. I remember I grew up in California, and so Prop 8 passed while I was like coming out and coming of age. And a little historical context for friends, because now I'm older, that was when gay marriage was like, it happened in California and then it was taken away. And it felt like, I was like, oh, I don't ever get to do that now. I feel different. I feel like abandoned by where I live. And it was very, very confronting and confusing. And, when we're told these things from the outside, that was about, marriage, and now we're talking about like your identity, who you are, what you need access to is being completely removed. And I can't ever know what that's like, but I can know that it just must be unimaginably painful.
Yeah. I mean, it's already hard being a kid. And then it's hard being a queer kid. And then imagine being a queer trans kid in a place where they're not allowed to even talk about who they are, or a teacher legally has to report them to their parents for being who they are, which is also dangerous because if a kid comes out of the closet in any spectrum of the LGBTQIA plus community and they're not ready to come out to their family for whatever reason, but they're out to their friends, and then a teacher's legally required to report them, that could cause incredible harm at home, So these laws have really awful impacts. And it just goes to show how backwards thinking the GOP is in this, and how it really is it's really against kind of what they're preaching with their Christian values. And it's heartbreaking and it's sad.
It is heartbreaking. I completely agree. So we've sort of touched on this next question a little bit. So we've been discussing, the impact that this has, what's really going on behind these things. I want to ask, what do these recently passed anti-drag bills imply, would you say?
In terms of what do the laws do, or the social impact?
I think I would say both. They didn't specify in this user's question, but I would say for what is it? I would say, let's focus on the social impact because they vary from state to state. But I would say they unifyingly share what, this topic we were talking about is this unraveling.
Well, the social impact is, it's like we talked about earlier, they're demonizing a group of people to distract from their lack of legislation in any other productive way. And when you demonize a group of people, you are raising fear and hysteria among people by saying, oh, this group is this, that, or the other. And we're seeing it happen with Drag Story Hour, for example, which is an educational program done in libraries and schools across the country. It's a great way to teach people or to teach kids about acceptance and self-acceptance, acceptance of others, self-love. And just these kids don't care who's reading the book. They're just excited to hear a story. And it's a perk that somebody wearing sequins and a big wig gets to do it, right? But the societal impact of these laws is you have people saying, oh, this is traumatizing and terrorizing children. But then you have people showing up with guns, protesting, getting into fights, yelling curses and epithets at families as they're walking into these spaces. So what's more traumatizing? Families getting a story about a unicorn read to them, or people with guns screaming at kids as they go into a library. So it's backwards thinking. It's scary, and it's those are the societal impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of, and I'll drop this link in the chat for y'all friends to watch. If you haven't seen Marti's TEDx conversation, they really dig into some of this, and it's really powerful. Marti, when you shared about, you made this video and you did Baby Shark for this kid and all that stuff.
Well, that
and
was before. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
The Baby Shark phenomenon or whatever that happened in my drag career was years before these drag bans or this kind of rhetoric, imagine if it happened today. And it was really awful then, for those of you who aren't aware, I was doing a drag brunch and it was super fun and silly. And this little kid was there. He was 2 years old at the time. This is probably 5 years ago, 2018. What is that? 5 years ago, 5 years. So this little kid, he was there and I was oh, what song do you want me to perform? And of course he was Baby Shark. And I was okay, let's do it. And somebody sent me the video after the show and I posted it on my Twitter and it blew up, huge, just exploded. And of course there was thousands of positive comments, but there was also thousands of really awful negative comments that kind of touched on the language that's being used today. And it was a really interesting experience to then be on all these national news networks talking about this. It was just a really interesting experience, and now it's amplified 10,000%, and all over Baby Shark. you know, like that's
Right.
ridiculous.
Yeah. And it was before all this happened, but it's the same like fear that's stoking the fire, would you say?
Yeah, and with that video, you know, it was people were like, "Oh my gosh, this they're sexualizing this," and I'm like, you can see the video in my TED talk, or you can just Google it, you know. But like, I it's baffling to me. The hypocrisy is baffling to me because you see a lot of the same people who are writing this stuff. Their kids are in like child beauty pageants, which is like actually sexualizing kids, and you're taking your like sons to Hooters, being like, oh yeah, which nothing against Hooters, nothing against people who work there. I think it's great, like love it, work, do your thing. But the hypocrisy is what I'm talking about, where you're like telling your young kids to sexualize these waitresses, but then you're reversing it and saying, oh, these drag artists are sexualized. I'm like, no, like I perform Baby Shark, I like the most annoying song in the world, you know.
Yeah.
I performed Baby Shark for a kid because that's a song he wanted to see, and so it's just hypocrisy and like bending the narrative to fit what's convenient and not convenient for their own thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were saying earlier about like what, if we step back and think about, well, what's more dangerous and traumatizing to a child, hearing a story from, a person in a fabulous outfit, or group of people screaming at you when you're entering a building. So on that note, someone asked, how can we convince people that drag bans are the real threat and not the drag shows themselves? How can we convince these people to be like, wait, 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 wait?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult because you have these pundits and politicians who are stoking such fear. But the reality is, we know that there's more of us than them because we've seen that in the popular vote in this country. So I think it's just about we have to stay active about the drag bans, about the book bans, about the banning of critical race theory, about the banning of reproductive health care and reproductive justice. We have to stay loud. We can't just get exhausted from the news cycle, because the reality is that's why they keep pushing these things through so rapidly, state by state, is because they want us to be exhausted. They want us to get tired and worn down and not fight back. But we have to stay loud. We have to stay vigilant. We have to get people registered to vote. We have to do what the kids did after the horrific school shooting that just happened in Tennessee. These young kids showed up at the Capitol building in Tennessee and held these massive protests. In Texas, when they're debating drag and trans people's lives, like thousands of people showed up at the Capitol. We have to keep putting the pressure on and not getting tired, as easy as it is to get tired and exhausted, because it is exhausting. We have to keep the pressure up.
Yeah. Like you were saying earlier, people saying, oh, can we not live in such unprecedented times for 1 minute? It's fatigue, right? It's this like fatigue and exhaustion.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. But this is the agenda. They want to the conservative right in this country wants to prevent Black and brown people from voting. They want to prevent immigrants from coming here to fulfill the American dream that all of our families, none of us are from here unless we're indigenous. So they want to prevent women from having say over their health care. They want to prevent trans and non-binary people from having a say over their health care. They wanted for the party that preaches small government, they're reaching deeply into government overreach, so unprecedented times are definitely exhausting, but we are certainly in them, and we're focused on the wrong things. We've had how many superstorms this week across the country? Why aren't we focusing on climate justice? That's what we should be focusing on. But this is like talking into the void, right? Like we all know this. We all know this information. So now how do we then take this information that we have? We all know we can go back and forth talking about this all day long, and we're going to agree with you. We're going to, yes, 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 yes. But it's how do we have that dialogue where we can reach across the aisle and have conversations that are meaningful with the other side. And I know it's cliche, but it's about humanizing every issue, you know, like, and it's not easy. I believe the conservative right is in a cult mindset right now. That's the only way to describe it. When you uplift leaders the way they do, I don't uplift any politician that way, even if I support them. You know, when you put them in like a godlike state, like they do with Trump or DeSantis, it's really hard to kind of break that. But piece by piece we can, by having conversations and dialogues and mass protests.
Yeah. So I love this. So these calls to action. So like reaching across the aisle, so to speak, you know, that can sound like, oh, well, the politicians need to do that. So let's talk about, and you just mentioned a few, like what are actionable things that, you know, Hunter can go do, that Lisa can go do.
Well, I really
on the
quickly
call.
want to touch on something Lisa just said in the chat here about this analogy of like, it's a singing chorus, stop and take a breath. It is exhausting. And like I talked about, like that's what they want. They want us to be exhausted. So self-care through this movement, self-care is incredibly important. So if there's a day where you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I just cannot, it's overwhelming. It's okay to take a beat, take a breath, go on a walk, go sit by the water, drink some water, I got my Cadbury eggs yesterday because I with you the self-care day. I ate one with you right before we went live. Like do what you need to do for self-care, pass the baton to someone else for that day so you can catch your breath and then come back. But some actionable items that we can do, Hunter, which is what you just asked. Sorry to interrupt
No, it was perfect.
Go to the chat.
Actually, it was funny. I was thinking about the self-care too, and I was like, I just heard the call to action. I'm going to skip it, but that's work I need to do. It's not skipping the self-care, Marti.
But actionable items are look at what grassroots organizations are in your city or state that are doing the work. What organizations, small nonprofits, small groups that are doing the work to help house trans people and get them the healthcare that they need. What groups are helping students who are facing suicidal ideology because of everything that's happening? What groups are helping our seniors who it might not be safe in a senior center because they're LGBTQIA plus, you know, or homeless shelters or in jail where it might not be safe, you know, all these different places. What are the so research, what are the organizations? You know, a lot of states have equality groups, like there's Equality Texas, Equality Tennessee, Equality Kentucky, Equality Arkansas, in these states that this stuff is happening. Look to see what they're doing. Donate to your local ACLU chapter because we're going to need those folks to fight these laws. We're going to need those lawyers. And then find out, go to your town council meeting or municipal council meetings or city council meetings, whatever it is. There's always public forums for the most part at these places. Contact your local legislators. They're required in most states, not every state, in most states, legislators are required to meet with you if you request an appointment because they technically work for you. So set up a meeting, even with somebody from the opposite side, set up a meeting and I have so many drag friends across the country who have set up meetings with legislators from the other side to talk. And that's part of that, like, even if they like leave still voting again, whatever, you've planted the seed in some way that there's a human being on the other side of the bill that they're trying to pass. And that's really incredibly important. And then run for office yourself or volunteer for somebody who you believe in. But also volunteer in general, like volunteer with these organizations, volunteer for Drag Story Hour to do counter protest. You know, there are a lot of groups are holding up big umbrellas or big things to block the protesters so they can't be seen or so the families can't see them. So volunteer for that, volunteer at abortion clinics to, you know, keep protesters away. You know, take one weekend a month where you're like, this is my volunteer weekend. Organize your neighbors, you know. I think that's really, those are small lifts that you can do.
I love that. Thank you for those. Those are so helpful. And it's important to hear about, we can't do it every single day. We want to fix everything every single day. And then sometimes if we're feeling overwhelmed, then you're like, well, I'm just not going to do anything.
Just
I
pick a
feel
Saturday or a
hopeless.
Sunday. Yeah, just pick a
Yeah.
Saturday or a Sunday to volunteer,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I love hearing too about what we can do locally. And someone asked specifically, is there anything I can do from Illinois to help LGBTQIA communities in Tennessee and Texas? So like, and to blow that question up a little or expand that question a little bit, like, can I help other states, outside of my local help
Well,
as well?
sure. I mean, you can donate to the local organizations from that community or the ACLU. You can also like call those organizations, say, hey, what can I do? Do you do any kind of phone banking or phone bank fundraising or whatever? Or do you have folks who need a place to stay for a little bit? Maybe I have a room in my apartment or house that we can house somebody for a little bit, or even, if you're in another state, there's still issues. Like, for example, I said even in New York, we need to be doing stuff. So in New York, Senator Brad Hoylman, who's a good friend of mine, has a bill in the legislature right now to make New York a safe haven state for trans people. So if they come here and they're seeking gender affirming healthcare, they cannot be prosecuted in their state that may criminalize that. So that hasn't passed yet in New York. So we need to make sure that even in New York, we're really working on these issues. So find out in Illinois where you're from, who this person is from, find out what laws haven't passed in Illinois or what laws have been introduced or what bills have been introduced that are anti-LGBTQ, and then look at the organizations in your own neighborhood, because doing that, even if it's not the state that you think is being impacted, there's still stuff happening in states that seem like good states. I just did a gig in Pennsylvania recently at the Bucks County Playhouse, and it's a pretty it's outside of Philadelphia. It's like a conservative area, but like not that conservative, right? And they have a big organization that helps trans people in the Bucks County community. But there's a school district there that has banned books in this area that you wouldn't think that would happen. So I would look at what your local school board is doing. I think school boards are the most overlooked elected office in this country, and they're the ones that are doing the most damage right now in a lot of ways, because they're the ones who are really pushing through the anti-critical race theory, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ stuff. They're the ones who are also uplifting things like Ron DeSantis, and I use him as an example because he's the one in the news a lot. This is happening in other states, but where you can't talk about menstruation in school, which is a natural bodily function that people who menstruate need to learn about so they can learn how to take care of themselves and their health and their bodies. But when you're banning even talking about it, that's like bananas, right? So look at your local school boards and see what they're doing and in your community.
It's so important. I have many friends that are teachers, and every time I talk to them about their day, they're like, it is so political. My job is so political.
Well, it's political. And then you add on top of that where you have legislators saying we should arm teachers, that we should be arming teachers. What? No, what we should be arming teachers with is pencils and math books and science books and the tools they need to educate kids, not
Yeah. Mind blowing. Shout out to Rob in the chat. Says, I find it great to subscribe to local newspapers or other local media. It's often the way to see what's happening on things like school boards or when they are meeting. Great tip, Rob. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. So friends, we have about 25 minutes left. So if you have any questions for Marti, please drop them in the chat. They would love to answer your Q&A. We're gonna take a little show number for a sec, and then we're gonna come back to questions. But please do feel free to keep that chat alive. We would love to hear from you. Okay, let's see here. So someone asked, and okay, buckle up. This is a big one.
Oh boy.
So here we go. So they said drag bans, healthcare bans for trans children, and now some states like Florida seem to be going after the healthcare rights of trans adults. It all feels like a tsunami of anti-rights movements. What rights do you think they'll try to degrade, or derogate, just like remove next? How can we, as folks from the queer community, protect ourselves?
Well, it's intersectional, right? So we're seeing it happening with, and we touched on this earlier, how they're like I had mentioned, they're now looking to the affirming healthcare is creeping past school age into like adulthood and things like that. But they're already looking at other things like we talked about. They want to they're the way they're doing voting rights, the way they're banning critical race theory, the way the woke law in Florida is the one where like you can be at work and say, oh, I'm a white person who's offended that we're taught like whatever. And it's like, that is so ridiculous. We live in such a diverse world, not just country, but world. And so when you start banning what people can talk about, what they can read, what they can say, what they can access in terms of healthcare or education or anything like that, it's fascism at its finest. And it's intersectional within the queer community because LGBTQIA plus people make up every demographic of humanity, where we come from every socioeconomic background, every racial background, every religious background, so it's intersectional. So I think some things that we can do is just like what we're talking about, like just really looking at what's happening in your own backyard. What is the company you're working for doing? What is your company doing? Is your company one that just slaps a rainbow on at Pride? Or are they doing stuff throughout the year to do this? Or is your company one that slaps a rainbow on at Pride and then still contributes to campaigns and causes that are detrimental to LGBTQIA plus people? Like really take a look at where you're spending, who you're working for, and what are their actual core values.
Yeah, it's so important. Okay. So you touched on this a little bit too, about some laws that are being proposed in New York City, like New York City, for instance, being a safe haven. Someone asked, what are some of the safest US states for the queer community currently?
Right now, Michigan, I would say. Governor Whitmer has made Michigan a safe haven state just recently. California is a good one, who's doing a lot of work. Massachusetts has like the strictest gun laws in the country. If you follow David Hogue, who was part of March for Your Lives and was part of Parkland, he does a lot of work around trying to get other states to implement the gun laws that Massachusetts currently has. And Massachusetts is also, I believe, a safe haven for LGBTQ people. But I think a lot of different state legislatures and governors should be modeling themselves after what Michigan has done in the past couple of weeks to make their state a safe haven. So if you just look up, what Governor Whitmer has done, I think that's a great model, and that's something you can take to your legislators in the state you're from, being like, hey, I saw that this happened in Michigan. This is what the bill is. This is what it says. How can we implement that here? And what can I do as a constituent to help you call people to get them on board? And then organize like phone banks with your neighbors and your friends and have them call the legislators because bills need a certain number of co-signers to be able to get through things. And so make it a little party, have a little pizza party and make some phone calls.
I love that. A social event.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Make it fun.
Yeah.
It's depressing, so make it fun.
Depressing, but make it fun and fashion. Yes. Make it work, designers. Carrie asked, as an ally, what can I do to help? And I feel like I feel like the advice we've given is for everyone, right?
Oh, this advice is for everybody, but allies, we cannot win this fight without you. We cannot win it without you. We need straight folks to be louder and more persistent than we are at all times, because that's how we're going to win. We need our straight allies to be very incredibly vocal in every way, shape, form that there is, because straight people are the majority, and legislators will probably listen to them more. So we need our allies to really speak up, and do all of these actionable items.
Yeah. And on a related note, someone asked, what can what are some resources you could share to help educate ourselves on this topic? So let's say like, oh, I just kind of read the headlines, but I don't really know what's going on. What should we read?
Well, I think to learn more about what Drag Story Hour is, what the work that they're doing, you can visit Drag Story Hour's website. They have an entire page on like literally every question you could ever have about Drag Story Hour, what it is, what it isn't, you know. I think that's a great resource. I think looking at the Anti-Violence Project and their website to see what are tools you can do to be safe at counter protests to these events. What are tools you can do to help if you do go to a rally at a state capitol building or a city hall? I think look at GLAAD is a great resource, and they have great toolkits on what to do to help out. And then look at organizations like the Transformation Project. Look at organizations. I mentioned the ACLU, of course, but I would look at yeah, I would start with those. Drag Story Hour and the Anti-Violence Project, I think, are great resources on like how to see what they actually are and how you can help support.
Thank you for that. There's so many ways to support, and for folks that maybe are, let's say I'm doing that weekend a month. I'm doing the phone banks. I'm showing up to protests. What's next? How do we level up? Run for office?
Yeah, I did it. It's a lot of fun.
A lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody should, every good-minded person should consider running for office if they feel so inclined. Yeah, I think leveling up is just continuing to do the work, as like cliche as that sounds. It's just, we have to stay aggressive. We cannot be complicit or laissez-faire about this. Movements are won by actionable steps. Movements are won by being, I like to use right now the example of what's happening with the labor in France and how they want to raise the age of retirement, and workers are protesting by the millions, and they're doing mass strikes where like every industry is shutting down and millions of people are taking to the streets. We need that energy here in America around the gun epidemic and around all these things happening to different groups of people in this country. We need a mass movement of millions of people, and that starts with these little actionable items: having a pizza party phone bank, gathering your friends to go to a city hall meeting or a school board meeting, gathering your friends to go support a Drag Story Hour and Black counter protesters, you know, going to give meals to a trans housing organization in where you live. So oh yeah, Laura just put in the chat, look at the corporate equality index. That's a really good place to kind of see where corporations actually lie. And then if you work for one of these companies, like, don't be afraid to speak up. You can make change within companies by organizing within your own company and bringing that to the diversity and inclusion department, if your company has one of those, or start a diversity, inclusion and accessibility department within your company. I think that's incredibly important also if you don't have one.
So important. And you know, and we were talking about too what the impact these things could have, you know, and this ripple effect, and it'll start showing up in our workplaces as well. You know, we've started to make some progress, and it's going to be this ripple effect, and it could also be you know, a step back, you know, for everyone.
I think the most important takeaway though is school boards. Like they are just the battleground of a lot of these issues right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marti, this has been absolutely fantastic. I know people will want to keep the conversation going with you. How do they stay connected with you? What can they watch? What can they listen to and to keep up with you?
Just, message me on social media. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm always
Awesome.
posting, if you follow me, I'm always posting actionable things more like kind of eloquently than I did today, where I'll have like I post links to stuff all the time and
Yes,
organizations that need help. And Talon in the chat is right. It's easier to stop a car than to stop a train, but trains can be stopped.
that's absolutely true. And to speak to, I was looking at your Instagram stories today, and it was just so lovely to see too that when you are doing your drag shows, you're also using it as an opportunity to get the word out. You were telling people to call their
Oh
senators,
my God, you
in
saw the
between
video.
sets. Yes, of course I
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah, because I want New York to pass the safe haven bill. So I had to stop the show to talk about it.
But I think it's so important, and it makes me think of something you said in the past in your TEDx conversation. You said something along the lines of like, drag isn't just about entertainment. It's about uplifting, educating, empowering, and also it's about leadership.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said so many beautiful things. And I also love that. Can you talk about maybe all of us going forward? You also talked about the subject of leading with kindness. So
Yeah,
can you tell me about that?
it's really easy to be an a-hole. It's very easy to, and yes, I pop off at people all the time about these issues. But I think it is equally as important to, we're fighting for our young people, right? So we want to be examples to them in this fight. And I will be very quick to shut down the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the George Santoses and the Ron DeSantises of this world by letting them have it. But I also will be very quick to remember that a lot of young people follow me and are watching me, and how am I speaking? What language am I using? What words am I using? Because it's easy to throw a lot of like curse words at a thing. It's harder to say, hey, what you're doing is actually harmful because, and then you can say, trans kids are more likely to have suicidal ideation, and your legislation is contributing to that. So when you say you're pro-life, do you actually believe that, or do you not care if these kids live or die? Like it's how. I mean, it's much easier to be like F you. Trust me, I would love to do that, but sometimes you have to, bite the bullet and just really, look at like, what is the example? What is our side trying to do? What is the example we're trying to set? And we're trying to make a better world for people. And part of that is by being a kind person.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, Marti. Thank you for this just really powerful conversation, actionable items, reminding us that kindness is key. It's the golden rule. It's an oldie. It's the golden rule for a reason, right? Because like you've said, there's another person on the other side of that conversation. So think about other people's humanity. Thank you for bringing your kindness and your wisdom to this, and I hope we get to do it again.
So thank you, Hunter, and thank you, PowerToFly, and everybody for being here today.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.